On the 8th of December, 1934, Kuwait's mud brick city was still standing. Within days, hundreds of its homes were gone. The British political agent in Kuwait, Colonel H.R.P. Dixon, logged 3 inches of rain in a single hour, more than half of what Kuwait normally receives in an entire year, falling in 60 minutes. Kuwaiti accounts put the total at more than 300 millimeters over 3 days, well beyond the country's annual average. Dixon counted 350 houses collapsed and 1,000 more badly damaged. Kuwaiti records say more than 500 homes were destroyed outright. Around 18,000 people were affected, thousands of them left with nowhere to sleep. Kuwaitis would spend the next century measuring time by this storm, calling it Al-Haddamah, the destroyer. What the hook cannot tell you is what those 18,000 people actually lived through while the rain was still falling. Start with the walls, because the walls are where this disaster begins. Mud brick does not collapse the way stone does. It softens first. The mortar between the bricks takes on water and turns to paste. A section of wall leans, almost gently, and then the roof follows it down. That is the mechanism, and it is why a rainfall event that would inconvenience a modern city could dissolve an entire district of this one. The district that took the worst of it was the stretch between Darwazat Abdulrazzaq and Naif Palace in the heart of Kuwait City. That is where the collapse is concentrated. Families in that quarter would have had very little warning, not because nobody saw the rain coming, but because there is no useful warning to give when the material your house is made of is the thing that is failing. The streets did not help. Kuwait City in 1934 was a walled town of packed earth and sand, built for foot traffic and animals, with nothing beneath it that resembled drainage. When that volume of water arrived, the ground could not take it. The alleys between the houses would have channeled it. And the water carried the dissolved remains of the walls straight through the neighborhoods those walls had defined. That is the picture. Now here is the part of it that was actually written down. The health department officially recorded 11 injuries. 2 of those people died. That is the entire formal casualty record of Al-Haddamah, and it is worth sitting with how little it captures. It counts the people who reached medical care. It does not count the thousands who sheltered in mosques, in Quranic schools, in government buildings, waiting out a storm that had taken their houses. Those people left no ledger entry at all. 18,000 people affected. And the official record fits on 2 lines. There is a second gap in the record, and it sits right at the center of the story. Dixon, on the ground, wrote 3 inches in 1 hour. Kuwaiti accounts, written later, say more than 300 millimeters. Those are not the same claim. 300 millimeters is roughly 12 inches, more than double Kuwait's entire annual rainfall. The 3-day duration in the Kuwaiti accounts closes some of that gap, but not all of it, which means the single most repeated number about the most remembered disaster in Kuwait's modern history does not match what the man who filed the report that December actually recorded. Nobody has ever really reconciled it. It is a small thing. It also tells you how thin the documentary record is for an event that 18,000 people lived through. What the government did next reveals exactly how unprepared Kuwait's administration was, and how fast it had to improvise. Within days of the storm, a joint committee was formed between the municipality and the Public Works Authority. Kuwait City was divided into work zones. Supervisors were assigned to patrol each one and report on the damage. And here's the detail that tells you everything about the scale of the problem. The Kuwait Oil Company had to lend its own vehicles just to pump the standing water off the streets. The city had nothing capable of doing that job, not one municipal vehicle equal to the task. When the water needed moving, the administration had to go and borrow the equipment from a foreign oil concern. Al-Haddamah exposed that gap in the most brutal way available. 20 years later, Kuwait was hit again, not a minor shower. The rains of 1954 were heavier than the rains of Al-Haddamah. More water, the same mud brick vulnerabilities, the same ground that could not absorb it. And yet when Kuwaitis today reach for the storm that defines their calendar, they do not reach for 1954. They reach for 1934. That gap between the storm that was worse and the storm that was remembered tells you something important about what Al-Haddamah actually did to the people who lived through it. Disasters are not ranked by their statistics. They are ranked by what they take from people who had nothing to spare. Because in 1934, Kuwait had nothing to spare. This was a country before oil. The concession that would create Kuwait's oil industry had not yet been signed. The pearling trade that had carried the economy for generations had been gutted by the collapse of the market for natural pearls. The town was mud brick and packed earth inside a wall, and the people inside it were not wealthy. So when 500 homes dissolved, the families inside them did not lose a portion of what they owned. They lost the whole of it because the whole of it was inside those houses. That is the context the casualty figures cannot hold. 2 deaths, 11 recorded injuries. Those numbers are real and they matter, but they do not carry the weight of thousands of people sleeping on mosque floors while the rain was still falling outside, not knowing whether the walls around them would hold until morning. The elders who survived Al-Haddamah did not make it a calendar marker because it was the largest storm by volume. They made it a calendar marker because it was the moment the city came apart in their hands. The elders chose 1934 over 1954, the heavier storm, because of what it took from people who had nothing left over. Do you think that is why disasters get remembered? Not the scale, but the timing? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happened 15 days after the rain stopped is where this story turns. On the 23rd of December, 1934, 15 days after the flood, the Kuwait Oil Company concession was signed. 15 days. The city was still drying out. The committee was still walking the work zones. Thousands of people were still sheltering in mosques. And in that same fortnight, Kuwait signed the agreement that would eventually make it one of the wealthiest countries on earth. 2 events, 2 weeks apart, pointing in opposite directions. One exposed everything the city did not have. The other would eventually pay for all of it. Nobody in December 1934 knew that. The oil would not be found in commercial quantity for years, and it would not be exported until after the war. To the families in the ruined quarter, the concession was a piece of paper about something underground. It changed nothing about the winter they were living through. But it is one of the strangest coincidences in Kuwait's modern history, and it sits almost entirely unremarked. Go back to the committee, because the committee is the part of this story that outlasted the water. It did not simply clear the streets and disband, dividing the city into work zones, assigning supervisors to patrol districts, coordinating between the municipality and the public work side. That was the closest thing Kuwait had in 1934 to a system for managing a disaster, and it had been invented on the spot, in the mud, after the catastrophe had already happened. Think about what that means for the families still sleeping in mosques while that committee was being assembled. The response was not slow because officials did not care. It was slow because the machinery to respond faster did not exist anywhere in the country. Al-Haddamah did not just destroy hundreds of houses. It exposed in real time the complete absence of any civic framework built to protect people when the sky turned on them. The poetry came afterwards. Kuwaiti poets put Al-Haddamah into verse, and the storm became a symbol of collective suffering that outlasted the physical wreckage. That is how it entered the language. That is how it became a way of dating events. Before Al-Haddamah, after Al-Haddamah, for people who had no other calendar that mattered as much. But underneath the elegiac memory is something harder. A government that had been forced to look at its own city and admit that mud brick, packed earth streets, and borrowed oil trucks were not a foundation that could hold. The test of whether that admission changed anything came in 1954. By then, oil money was flowing. The improvised committee had given way to something more permanent. Kuwait was in the early stages of the transformation that would rebuild it completely. And the heavier rains of 1954 still found mud brick neighborhoods to damage, because the rebuilding of Kuwait City was not happening at the speed the storm of 1934 had demanded, and it was not happening everywhere at once. That distance is where the real legacy of Al-Haddamah lives, not in the poetry, not in the casualty count, not even in the borrowed trucks. It lives in the 20 years between the warning the city received and the pace at which the city was actually able to answer it. 20 years is a long time to remain vulnerable to the same collapse. So picture a family who rebuilt on the same ground where their house had dissolved. They were not being reckless. Mud brick was not a preference. It was the material economy of a country before oil, where stone was scarce. Timber came in by sea at a price, and the labor to build anything more permanent was beyond most households. So they rebuilt in mud on the same plot, in the same quarter, and they waited. That is the detail the elders were preserving when they chose Al-Haddamah as their marker over the heavier storm that came after it. They were not measuring rainfall. They were measuring the moment they understood that the city they lived in was not built to protect them, and that the people responsible for it were only beginning to work out what that meant. The oil revenue that would eventually rebuild Kuwait was real, but it arrived gradually. And the question of who got protected first and who waited longest is a question this storm had already put on the table 2 decades before anyone had the money to answer it. That is what Al-Haddamah actually was. Not just a storm, a night, and then a fortnight, and then a generation in which a city discovered its own limits, wrote down almost none of it, and remembered all of it anyway. 350 houses in one man's ledger, 500 in the national memory, 11 injuries, 2 deaths, and 18,000 people whose experience never made it into any record at all. The elders were not preserving grief when they dated their lives by that December. They were preserving a before the oil, before the infrastructure, before the city that would rise over the ruins of the quarter between Darwazat Abdulrazzaq and Naif Palace. And they were insisting that the transformation which followed was not a gift that arrived from nowhere. It was a response, a delayed, imperfect, generation-long response to the winter when the rain came down on a mud brick city and the city did not hold. Subscribe if you want more like this, and watch the next one on screen.